Hi, team. So we're going to wait a couple minutes for everyone to come in since there's only two of us right now. So you can
Yeah,
see, probably we're going to be discussing some of the Crate cloud cluster stuff. Ericsson made some updates, so if you haven't had a chance to look at that, you might want to look at that because I think that's going to be the first one in.
sure, Tim.
Hi, we're waiting for people are starting to come in, so we're waiting a couple minutes. My question is Ericsson on for the Crate cluster, KDS cluster? A lot? Do you know, are you doing it or someone else?
Hey Tim, yeah. So I think it's Stefan. I can check internally
Yeah,
just to make
because
sure we.
I think you guys are the ones. You're the reason for the season today. So
Yeah, let me check with them.
okay. You tell it's MWC, right? Last week was the ORAN face to face, and this was MWC. So it's almost like the holiday season here in terms
Hmm.
of activity. To let everyone else know, I think what we're going to be doing today is talking about the Crate cluster. Ericsson did this update, so we'll probably be using that as the source. You should be able to get to it if you want to do some reviews as we wait for Ericsson to. What? All right, I'm starting to see some of the Ericsson folks come in. So let's start this. This is the February 28th meeting of the ORAN working group. We have today some agenda items, one to approve some previous minutes from last meeting. Then we're going to start talking about the three outstanding user stories, or at least one of them today. I think that's what's prepared. Maybe there might be others, but certainly the Crate cluster. And then do we know, and then we'll discuss any action items that we have that came out of our scoping that we think that we need to have, or if we've got them all taken care of, should be the last two. And that's everything. That's all I have on the schedule for right now. Does anyone have anything they want to add? Okay, I don't hear anything, so we'll start. So the approval of the February 14th minutes, you see the notes here. Does anyone have any concern with approving these minutes? All right, I'm not seeing anything. I'll mark them approved. So again, the first user story that we have to discuss is the Ericsson updates to the cluster. And who's going to do that? Is that Stefan? Or who's doing this one?
Yeah, I can. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, good. I will
You got
open it
some.
up
Hey,
and
hey, Stefan,
share from here.
you do
Yeah,
have some noise behind you. So if there's some way to, is there any way to reduce that noise behind you?
I
You
can
got some
see if I
background
can
noise.
come a little. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm in a noisy place. I cannot really move away.
Okay. All
Can you
right.
hear me now? Or
Yeah, we
if
can
I
hear you.
speak
Just
up? Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
we can hear you. Go ahead and give it a shot.
Okay,
But I'm going to
okay,
let
great.
you share, right?
Yeah, I will share here.
All right. I'm going to stop.
Just a moment. Share screen. There we go. Okay, can you see my sharing now?
Yes, we can.
So let me go through towards the component architecture then, because this is where I have made updates. So I have tried to,
Hey, Stefan,
believe,
could you do me,
yeah,
Stefan, could
yes,
you do me a favor? You got that app Zoom US is sharing your screen. Could you just move that off to the side somewhere if you can? Because it's right in the middle. Yeah,
right,
there you
right,
go. Thanks,
thanks.
bud.
Okay, so I was planning to just walk through my updates now then in the document. So what I did first was that in the introduction here, I added some more text around the background of what we are talking about here. I refer to the nephew Oran overall architecture that we have defined with this key important thing that you have on the FOCOM NFO side, you have one SMO nephew instance or nephew management cluster. And then on the IMS side, on the OCloud side, you have a separate nephew management cluster. Assuming that you have decided, like on both sides, to implement your functionality using nephew. And then it is the O2IMS interface that will be the integration point between these two. And on the FOCOM side, we have this nephew S southbound adapter that is tasked to integrate using O2IMS towards the OCloud IMS implementation. And this, as we have said, and this also allows us for being like multi-vendor flexible here in terms of that some vendors might decide that we don't want to implement our IMS necessarily using Nephew. As long as we are exposing an O2IMS interface, that will be good, and vice versa on the SMO side. So this is the way we think we can then support on both sides that you can use Nephew as the design base, either for your FOCOM NFO or for your IMS, and still have this interoperability then towards others that might use other implementation like design bases.
So
Yeah.
just a second.
Yes.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll take a look at the questions or chat. So is there any questions, guys, on that intro piece of it? Because I want to make sure that we understood exactly what's going on. All right, I don't see any questions. Okay, go
I
ahead,
had one
Stefan.
question, maybe.
Web's got
Yeah.
a question.
I was interrupted in the beginning. So are you proposing that the FOCOM side would live on a separate cluster than the Nephew one? Or was that what you were saying?
So the FOCOM and NFO would typically share the same nephew management cluster then. So it's like on the SMO side, you will have one nephew management cluster. And then on the IMS side, you will have a different nephew management cluster.
Or yeah, I mean, whether we call it the management cluster or nothing, okay, that's probably the discussion.
Or we more like a nephew deployment, if you prefer to say.
Yeah, we have
so.
to.
Like,
okay, we have
like,
to. But here we have to.
it's-
Yeah, that's one of the discussions we need to.
Yeah.
We have a hierarchy of.
I will.
Yeah, I tend to, I mean, avoid using the deployment cluster terminology because that gives an impression, a little bit of a application side of things, right? So I think the thought process was to have like two, like you said, Stefan, two separate management clusters, right? Because ultimately there will be an O2 IMS in between, and these two management planes should have like the segregation through this multi-vendor interface, right? That's what ORAN architecture is defining. So yes, there will be two management planes in two different layers, one in SMO and the other one in the O cloud.
Yeah, but we could also, you could deploy it all together if you want, right? We should not be prescriptive about that, I guess.
No, I don't think so, right?
So-
Because then it will not be ORAN compliant because we have a clear segregation between the two layers, right? One is the SMO and the other one is the O cloud, and they could technically be from two different vendors.
Sure, but I mean,
there were
why would
some variants we discussed. I mean, I think in the architecture document there are some variants where in smaller deployments we said the IMS could be part of the nephew management cluster. So that's one of the variants that's been captured there. I think it was your
So what we
feedback.
need to perhaps we can, if we look into the modeling here and see how that would look like then. But I mean the key here is that in the interaction we should have a clear separation between like the role for like the FOCOM parts and what you are exposing up on the nephew NBI adapter on the FOCOM side, and how you interact towards like your like nephew implementation on the IMS side. I think, and how this relates also to the package management that I will describe here in the document.
That's exactly my point, right? We agree on the API. I think we should agree on API. How you deploy it, I think it's a customer choice, right?
Yeah.
We should.
Yeah, and basically the API would be that you have an API exposed like an IMS level API that is O2 IMS compliant, that is following the ORAN standardization here, and then you have like a FOCOM northbound API then that is according to like the ORAN specification, the FOCOM service API then that will be exposed northbound from the FOCOM side. I'm sorry for noises here. Shall I continue? Then perhaps we can revisit this. This is exactly the discussion we want to have. Maybe we can go through like our thought process here on how things would look like then on each side.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So the next picture, it was there since before. It's just showing just zooming this out one step then that like the role for FOCOM then is to be able to integrate towards multiple O-clouds then. So we have the O-cloud 1, O-cloud 2 here and federate orchestration of clusters across both of those O-clouds. And in that sense, FOCOM will be the one then that would integrate towards like multiple O2 IMS endpoints then. So you will have each O-cloud is expected to expose their own O2 IMS interface and support like the cluster management provisioning APIs for O2 IMS and inventory APIs to expose their hardware site infrastructure and so on that they have in their particular O-cloud. And that is the way FOCOM then will be the one tying these together. And so that from like a higher level SMO view from orchestration layers above FOCOM, they will see this as a whole set of like infrastructure then that you have available from provided by all these O-clouds then. And FOCOM is the one that is integrating towards the different IMSs. And again, then this is where we see that like this the importance then of the O2 IMS integration point then, because especially then when you have multiple different IMS vendors on the southbound side, and they will have their own management system then, based on FU or not. That is open or flexible, as long as they are exposing the O2IMS interface. But on the FOCOM side, then we shall integrate towards all of these different IMS systems. Then I have added a picture because in the O-RAN Workgroup 6, they have introduced the concept now of an O-Cloud cluster template that I think fits well with the way Nephew is working also with package-based deployment of the clusters. So this picture is coming from the O-RAN documentation, the O-RAN specification on, I refer to it, the interface general aspects and principle specification. And they describe the details then inside of the O-Cloud in terms of that you have a template catalog with a number of cluster templates, and each of them has then references to cluster template artifacts that are internal to the O-Cloud. So here you can have very vendor-specific configurations tailored to certain requirements for certain nodes and certain hardware and scripts related to this and BIOS settings and so on that are very specific to how that particular O-Cloud will realize a certain cluster with certain characteristics. And that information then, the idea here in O-RAN is that level of information should not have to be exposed up to the SMO side. So on the SMO side, what you show then in your template is like higher level characteristics with a list of capabilities and capacities, and perhaps some additional metadata that describes your cluster. And basically that is the information then that SMO will use in order to take decisions related to which network functions that needs which cluster template for their cluster, and also take decisions about which site that has sufficient hardware or matching hardware that actually can support a particular cluster template. So all that level of information is relevant to expose up to the SMO. But the detailed configuration files then, the way you actually configure your particular node hardware inside of the O-Cloud, we think in this thinking then it's not necessary to be exposed up to the SMO side. So what you instead do then, you have this list of template entries on the SMO side with the different characteristics for each template and which O-Cloud it is available on, and which template ID you shall refer to if you want to deploy this particular template in the O-Cloud. So this approach is what we would like to follow now then when we talk about these two sides of Nephew implementation. So you have like an SMO FOCOM Nephew deployment, you have an O2 IMS, an IMS, O-Cloud IMS side of a Nephew deployment. And then the way we draw it then is that you will basically have like a Nephew based, we have in this picture, okay, I have zoomed in on the Nephew based SMO side then, because that is where we have particular proposals on how things should be modeled and in packages and so on. So our thinking is you have a Nephew based SMO FOCOM, you have a number of O-Clouds southbound over the O2IMS API that you shall integrate towards. They can be either Nephew or non-Nephew based, but because they need to follow the O-RAN standard, we know that they should have these O-Cloud cluster templates available then. So initially, you will have a number of such, you can say, blueprints then for your cluster in your O-Cloud that is tailored for their particular hardware. So you have blue templates for the blue cloud and red-orange templates for the red-orange clouds. And then what we see then is that we want to keep on the SMO side then, we want to keep the way of working in Nephew. We would like to use, like we have the same design base for the Nephew-based SMO FOCOM. And in the same way you have in Nephew today then, you have a corresponding cluster template repo in the Git repository on the FOCOM side. And these SMO cluster templates, they represent basically this table then. So here is just shown as a table in the O-RAN spec. But we were thinking is that it shall be represented even on the SMO side and as cluster template packages that is managed then in the Git repo via the kept port APIs, just the way Nephew is doing it today. Then. And then for the integration then down to O2IMS, our proposal is that the following basically the architecture you have today in FUR1, R2, we still keep copy as the southbound framework for integration. But here we would need them to update this with an O2IMS provider plugin. So instead of like the current Docker kind provider plugin, for instance, you have an O2IMS provider plugin, and you have the corresponding O2IMS copy manifest files that is deployed, and that is then coming from the SMO cluster template package. So basically, the deployment will be done in the way that you have the O-Cloud cluster template as the very first basis. We expect that is typically something that CNF vendors and O-Cloud infrastructure vendors very much close together, created like a reference design for different deployments for like ORAN network functions or 5G core network functions, where they really create a reference deployment with matching hardware and matching hardware configuration that is then documented and stored as a cluster template. We see these similar things happening today in different cases with different policy files or configuration files, but there is no unified format for how these look like, and especially then what information that you should be able to query for when you are querying for such a cluster template then. So this is what we would like to do like a stricter specification of then with this proposal then, so that the idea is that the SMO side should be able to query for basically the template catalog with the cluster templates in a particular O-Cloud as part of the O-Cloud registration sequence, and then store the corresponding matching SMO cluster templates that I think typically can be auto-generated. Because all the unique information is coming from the O-Cloud cluster template. So they can be stored then as cluster templates on the Nephew SMO Git side. And then those are the templates that are exposed northbound to the different other SMO services. So as I said then, yeah, this is details I think everyone can read.
But there is a raised hand. Sorry to disturb. There's a raised hand.
Absolutely.
Lohit, please ask a question.
Yeah. So I think I'm confused here. You have shown here O-Cloud 1, O-Cloud 2, O-Cloud 3. Ideally, there should be one IMS, right? And the IMS should be responsible to manage all the sites, all the O-Cloud sites. So this makes me confused.
Okay, I should clarify here. Okay, it's a good point. We have seen that typically in a lot of ORAN specifications. When we talk about O-Clouds, it is a bit unclear there whether you mean one particular site with one particular like a number of clusters in that site, or if you mean a whole O-Cloud infrastructure. And this is something we are not driving from Ericsson, that when you talk about an O-Cloud and O-Cloud onboarding, that is like a whole distributed O-Cloud from one IMS or one O-Cloud vendor then. And there you have, as you say, you're right, you have one single IMS interface, but this O-Cloud, this box is a whole distributed network with like thousands of sites in itself then. And this other one here, this can be another complete O-Cloud infrastructure with one IMS interface and like thousands of sites. So this O-Cloud could come from like Ericsson, for instance. We have our Ericsson cluster infrastructure. And another O-Cloud could come from Red Hat or Google or Microsoft, for instance. So it represents the whole O-Cloud then. With one IMS then for each such vendor. Yeah.
Okay, got it.
So you are right.
Per site.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you are right. So it's only in the case where you really have multiple different OCloud vendors that exposes different IMS interfaces that you would need to have this like integration towards multiple IMSs.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. So as I said, then we wanted
So
to
hang
have
on.
something we
So
can.
we got
Yeah.
just a
It's
second. So we got
yeah,
we
I
got
couldn't see.
Robbie.
Sorry.
So Robbie, go ahead.
Yeah.
Oh, I lost the screen. Can you open that document?
Yeah.
Okay. This one, you have this inventory service resource backend. Is this part of the FOCOM? Is it something different from FOCOM? I mean, some inventory that's outside FOCOM.
No, this is something we see would be needed inside of FOCOM then. So this whole box would be like the Nephew-based FOCOM implementation. So this inventory service backend would be a part of that implementation then. What we see that this inventory database is typically information that we will read up from each OCloud in terms of their site hardware inventory then. And most likely this inventory database will be some kind of a cache of the information that is actually stored in each OCloud. So we will query up information, we will get notification updates from the OClouds when things are changed. And that is the information we see we will keep then as a local cache on our side. And the thinking here is that this would work then as a resource backend. So we can, for instance, do injection of data then from this inventory database into the different custom resources on the SMO side. And so that is the way we say we should read this up then as a local cache on our side.
Okay.
So,
and there's
and then yeah.
So
and then another thing is that yeah.
So when you say cache, you actually mean a database, right? Not a cache.
It is a database, but it is not.
Okay.
Yeah, it will be a database where we will store things.
Just wanted to make sure.
But the master will still be on the OCloud side. So we will discover up the resources from the OCloud and store them in the inventory.
It's an actual database, maybe something like Postgres or MongoDB, something.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
We it's a bit.
Cool. So, sorry, I had to cut you off. Go ahead, Ravi.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
So,
I think
Robbie
this
or...
diagram, because you have multiple blocks there. So I was thinking, which is part of the Nephew management cluster, because Git I see is probably outside that thing, and then you have a bunch of CRs probably. Yeah, I was just thinking, where is the FOCOM? Because it will be realized as some kind of an operator there. And so probably I think just a feedback on, you could re-edit the document, the diagram a bit to identify the FOCOM components.
Yeah, so the way I see it for now, and that is perhaps also something I have left a bit open now, is that, I mean, typically the FOCOM will have like a FOCOM NBI, and I have shown that, that is the way I have shown it in the pictures later, or sequence. So I can draw that FOCOM NBI layer here. I can add that. What we are not fully clear on here is in the ORAN standardization then, what level of API we will support it. If it will be a higher level like cluster deployment API, cluster package deployment API, that is then residing on top of the kept Porch APIs. Or if it is basically the Porch API that you are exposing more or less directly towards like the other SMO clients. I think that is something we haven't really concluded at on our side from the Ericsson perspective. But I can still draw a FOCOM NBI layer here, because something for sure needs to be there related to exposure and authentication and so on.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I will do that.
Okay, Wim.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, so my question was, is copy an example, or is it, because I don't believe that every vendor is on board with copy. That's why I'm asking the question.
No, I think
just an example.
We can see here onwards. I agree. I think that the concrete proposals we have is more related to the Nephew workload cluster CR, or if that will be still the one, or if we shall add another CR. I will show that here on the next page.
Okay, I'll wait.
The way we will show it is that, yeah, so that is where we really have the specific, like Nephew specific changes that I see. Then you are right. I think because here, like just doing the injection the way we propose it into the copy manifest files, it should be possible if you have something else and you have CRs for another southbound integration, like follow that approach as well. Then I don't think we need to stipulate that necessarily. It's still more about, yeah, what should we have as a kind of a reference implementation in Nephew to start with. And so our thinking was that, yeah, it's natural to use copy because it's already there in Nephew today. And we see, I mean, we have some good experience with it from an Ericsson point of view. So that is where we see that, yeah, that could be a good way forward, at least for us.
Yeah, and the thing we might also brought to the point that there is an effort right now to make something very similar to enough topology using that workload CR in Nephew side. So probably, Stephen, I think I know you put this as an example. Most likely, that particular package may change a little bit in order to make it more generic and not tied to CAPI. Today, if you see Nephew, it has two northbound interfaces, one for CAPI and one for GCP to create a cluster. I think in the R3 timeframe, like we discussed in the last meeting, there is an effort going on to unify them, something what we did for enough topology in R2 for network functions. So probably I'm thinking when this whole thing takes form, that particular CAPI thing that you're showing, that will be a very normalized abstract API that Nephew is wishes to expose northbound.
Yeah.
I think that.
So do you see that this high level topology like CR, will it be specific for the O2IMS support and O2IMS
Stefan,
aspects, or
Stefan,
is it more general?
hang on.
Yeah.
You're not showing anything, just to let you know.
No, I know. I should
Oh,
go
okay.
back to this. Yeah.
All right, go ahead. Yeah. All right,
Yeah.
go ahead and finish your answer on that then.
So my question back to you, Bala, is that this we should check that. Do you see this new topology or abstraction levels? Is that one more general, or is it targeted particularly to O2IMS?
I believe it's more general.
Yeah, I'm involved. I mean, I think Stefan, you're on the thread, right? So it's very generic at the moment. So we can model anything because I'm of the opinion that every vendor probably might have its own secret sauce, like we did for NF deployment, right? So we didn't want to be let's say prescriptive on the specifics, right? So we wanted to make it as generic as possible. So the idea for the generalized northbound interface is the same. So it basically workload cluster, and then you can reference anything.
Yeah, that is where I have a bit of a concern, because we would like to make like something quite specific on the southbound then. And then if we can do that using your general like adapter, the way we think, I mean, they can be used using copy as a general adapter. I think that is fine, but implementation wise, then it should be something like a modeling and an implementation that is really following the O2IMS API then, so that like whatever we are talking with down here should then follow O2IMS and be able to integrate towards like an O-Cloud IMS that is like also based on some non-Nephew implementation. So that is what we are trying to
The way our
capture.
interface right now is basically so the way we are, even if you look to NF topology, it basically creates a PV, right? So it's a package variant. It refers to a template or a package in our case. And then it says, okay, deploy it there, and you can give some input context. That's basically our API.
Yeah,
So,
I've seen that. So I can continue here, and then we can see how it relates, because we are aiming for something that is more it's more specific for O2 IMS then, so that like a realization on the SMO FOCOM side that really can integrate towards like the O2 IMS interface southbound.
So one more thing, Stephen, if I'm not mistaken, maybe it's last time when I was looking at that particular diagram, your southbound the provider plugin, I think it said Nefio adapter or something. Is it coming in the next picture, the Nefio adapter part of it, or is that changed?
Perhaps that was on the higher level. This picture, right? That is here, Nefio SBI adapter.
Yes. Is it
this
the same?
Is where it is, yeah.
Is it so semantically that one and the one that you just showed in the diagram right now, where it says yes, O2IMS provider plugin, are they same?
Yeah, that it would be our proposal for how to implement this SBI adapter.
Okay, so I still believe my understanding is this SBI adapter, you will be introducing 2 new parameters, right? And then you'll be invoking Nefio through a REST call, and then that point onwards, that REST call would give all the parameters, everything that's needed from the Nefio perspective in order to go look at the repository, look at the catalog, and then realize the cluster creation. That was my understanding. Is that understanding still valid?
So basically, on this REST call here on the O2IMS interface, we will have we will have a reference to the OCloud cluster template that shall be deployed. So on the SMO side, we have picked a particular template down here. So we refer to that one. And then we will refer to the target site where this new cluster shall be deployed. And then we will there can be some instance specific parameters like IP addressing and so on that will also be included there. Everything else is expected to be provided inside of this OCloud cluster template.
Okay, and those things will be GitOps driven, is that right, from that point onwards?
Just like the way on this side, this is where we say that, like, this IMS, it can be Nefio or non-Nefio based. If this one is Nefio based, then then you will follow the same architecture here. So then the OCloud cluster template here will be yet another kept package then stored on the IMS Git in the IMS Git repo that will be invoked. And so when we refer to the template on the O2IMS API, IMS then will internally identify which OCloud cluster kept package that this refers to or template, and then it will deploy that one. And that will follow the same procedure then that you currently use in Nefio. So then you will clone that one then into a cluster deployment inside of the IMS. And then here inside here, you can then use your own IMS specific adapters, or if you have this abstraction adapter again, then you mentioned that one in this case, that one can be used then in order to map towards like the OCloud specific hardware. So if you have some certain specific configuration files or something that need to be applied, or certain other things that needs to be invoked on the OCloud side, that can be then modeled as completely OCloud proprietary artifacts then referring from this abstract artifact if you have it like that.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much.
So I'm also showing it like basically if you look at this like from a Nefio UI perspective, you would basically, if you have Nefio on both sides, you would have like your organizational blueprints. Okay, starting down in the OCloud, you would have your organizational blueprints then defined as a part of your catalog on the OCloud side. And this is the thing we will query up then to the SMO side. We will create the corresponding organizational blueprints on the SMO side. And then the deployment will follow the Nefio path. Then we clone then into the deployment management repo here. And that will trigger a copy to do the IMS request. And then if you have an IMS Nefio implementation, down here on the IMS side, you will do the same then. You refer to the blueprint, you will clone it into your deployment repo internally.
Okay.
Okay, hey, just real quick. So Stefan, just to
Yeah.
give you a time check, we've got about 15 minutes to go. Wim has his
Yeah,
hand up, so
yeah. We can take a question, and then perhaps I can go through
Okay.
it just so everyone get the overview, and then we can have a follow-up with more questions.
I
Yeah.
have more a suggestion, right? Because you said the interface from the management cluster to the O cloud is a REST call, right? So if you look at Kubernetes, it's a REST call, by the way. So my proposal would be the PV that I was talking about. So if you maybe do your screen again, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sorry. Yes. Yeah.
So the arrow between the upper cloud and the lower, the blue, the green, or the green, right? If that REST call would instantiate a PV, that PV reference a template, and whether that template is locally hosted on your catalog or is coming from the upper cloud, we don't care, right? Because it's just a Git or whatever repository you have in mind. And if you instantiate your PV with that template, it will do all the stuff that we do today. So my proposal from what I'm hearing right now is that if we would, if the upper cloud would inject a PV referring to the package or template, as you call it, right? We call it packages. Then you get exactly what you.
But
I think that could be, but then it is a bit more coming back to like the ORAN standardization here, whether that will be then like the interface we standardized then in ORAN. We have had those discussions around like making this like a CRD based interface and following the Kubernetes KRM model. So in that sense, I think a PV could be an option. We have not decided yet on what this IMS API will be. If it is a higher level REST API or if it is port operations and so on. I think that is a part of the discussion we really need to have, both like in this group and then towards ORAN and what we shall standardize here over to IMS.
Yeah, but hang on. So I just want to be clear, Wim, just to let you know that again, ORAN is standardizing that REST interface with its resources, right? So, so that's what we have to honor, and they have to go across, Nepio, XYZ, and etcNFV and that type of stuff.
But so anyhow, there needs to be a mediator, Tim, right? So in other words, what I'm proposing, one proposal is to use a straight interface as we have it. The other is you basically build something that takes O2 IMS REST and maps it to the PV, right? So that's also not a big deal.
That's right. And I think that's what they're suggesting here, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So basically, if O2 IMS is coming with like a higher level REST API, then you will need to have a logic like a northbound adapter here on the IMS side also that is mapping that to the relevant package variants or references to the cluster blueprints on the IMS side.
Yeah, but maybe quickly do so because Alok also has his hand up, right? But maybe quick is because then I don't necessarily understand why we are drawing ports and the PVs in the upper cluster necessarily, right? Because the main thing that we have to map towards Nepio is the part in the O cloud, right? So if we abstract it, whether we use CAPI or whether we use any other resources that the vendor of the O cloud implementation feels suitable for, we can use anything, right?
So the idea here is that we should be able, when we implement our SMO side then, to be able to integrate towards multiple O clouds. I mean, some of them are using like Nepio internally, some of them are not, and then they will just expose the information about their blueprints then in an O2 IMS standard way. And then we need to, on the SMO side, then, to provide like a unified way of handling all of these different template references. Then. So that is our thinking then, that the way we will handle this and manage the deployment of them and expose their status and so on, how things are going with each deployment, is that we are then having a corresponding cluster package on the SMO side then, that we are very following the same nephew way of working then also on the SMO FOCOM side, and I mean using a package there.
I think
I think Wim, the way I understood from Stephen's presentation is on the northbound of FOCOM, like the way he's showing, the APIs for those, I mean, obviously, I think northbound could be consumed by OSS systems or some other systems.
Yes.
I think they also, I think Stephen is intending to do those things based on Porsche as well.
Yeah, but I think then we have two discussions, right? If I'm honest, by the way, Alok has his hand, so we need to give him the time. So, but let me finish. So I think there is two discussions. There's one is how do we map the OCloud towards Nephew, and then there is how do we consume Nephew from an FOCOM point of view, right? I think they are potentially separate.
Yeah, I agree. They are actually separate. They are two stories. Like we need to implement on both sides. Yeah, I agree.
I think you summarized well at the end, when like since today the architecture is respecting both the ORAN architecture and what we in Nephew is designing and defining as a design principles, right? So we have a proper fan-out procedure, and since the SMO FOCOM component will also be Nephew based, so we kind of kept the same design principle. But then it's for the further discussions, do we want to keep it that level of logic and detailing in the SMO layer as well, or we can actually just keep minimalistic approach in the SMO, and then what we have done so far in the R1 and R2 would be very much OCloud specific. The Nephew,
but a lot, you got to go talk to Seishu and OSC, because that northbound, he's going to have a very specific requirement on it, okay? So my guess is just as what Stefan said, was that there's an MBI there that you're going to have to mediate to, just like you do on the southbound. Because I bet you he's not using kept ports to do that, right? So again, I think there's an MBI, as Robbie noted, that's there. And I think you need to have that conversation with Seishu about how you're hooking this up to his the other services within the SMO.
No, I'm absolutely. I'm not proposing that it should be changed, but just to answer to.
Okay, shall I go through the remaining pictures just so that we get an overview of? Then we can have a follow up in the next.
Yeah. Go ahead. We've got about 10 minutes, right? All right.
Yeah, I realize that. So we are running out of time a bit, but probably we need to continue next week then. So this part you can take a look at offline. This is our thinking on how we could leverage the workload cluster CR to provide some of this O2IMS specific information that also shall be then coordinated between the package on the SMO side here to the left and the package on the OCloud side. So this is just assuming that you either or both then are using Nephew to implement the SMO side or Nephew implementing the OCloud side. You would need, in both cases, to be able to represent and store a number of properties then that is related to the O2IMS side. So you have these common things that I say is synchronized between the both sides, like the cluster template ID, cluster template input data, and these template characteristics that I said will be specified by ORAN in more detail then. So those data, they will come basically from the OCloud cluster template, and we should be able to query them up via O2IMS. But if you know, say we decided to implement the IMS side with Nephew, then it could be one way of doing it is that we use the workload cluster CR to represent this O2IMS related data then. And then in this adapter we talk about that is exposing up the O2IMS interface. This red part is the data that you will expose them when we are querying for like the template catalog information and for each of the templates. And then correspondingly then on the SMO side, when we have queried up this information from any OCloud, we will store it also then still in the workload cluster CR as this same properties then. And this is the way we will expose them up then towards the other SMO services then, so they can find which input data that is required or which characteristics that this cluster will have and so on. And then we have some more instance-specific information like the OCloud ID, the OCloud site ID, like that kind of target that we need to then populate ourselves on the SMO side. There can be other things like this. I think this CNICE networking and interface information that is there today, I think that is typically things that probably only will be used on the workload cluster CR on the IMS side. I mean, there can be more things coming in here further on, but typically such things around like the network configuration and so on, as long as it's not around the input parameters like IP addressing and so on, we don't really need to see it on the SMO side. It could be just local for the OCloud template. And then zooming out a bit, this is the old pictures. I've tried to make this a bit more clear now. So this is the way it will look like then. If you have a kept package on the SMO side, SMO Cloud Edge DO cluster, here we have a workload cluster CR that is referring to a template ID that this is OCloud 1 Edge DO cluster. That is basically the package then down in the OCloud. And that one also have the same, like a workload cluster CR with matching information then. So it has the same ID and so on. But the difference here is that when we talk about the realization of them, on the SMO side, we will always refer to this cluster copy O2 IMS template. And so that one will be a generic way of doing it. If we decide to not use copy, to use something else, we should still aim for having something generic here so that it could look the same then for all SMO cluster packages. Here we was thinking that, yeah, if we use copy, we will have an O2 IMS cluster class and an O2 IMS provider plugin then. But that is our suggestion. Then on the IMS side, you will then beneath here in the packages, you can then refer to whatever you are using then. If you are still using copy, it could be like the Metal 3 provider plugin that has a manifest file, or the OpenStack Capo provider plugin. Or I have another example here where I even say that, yeah, it is completely IMS internal. So it could be some custom resources then that are specific for your own IMS implementation. And those manifest files will never be visible up on the SMO side. You will only expose what you have in your workload cluster CR. And then on the SMO side, all the templates will look the same then, because we, independent on what you have in your OCloud, we will always integrate with the O2 IMS provider plugin and the manifest files for O2 IMS. So in that way, the package structure can always look the same on SMO. The SMO implementation will have just one type of SMO package, and then each OCloud can have its own, internal package structure. So then this sequence, I ask you to look into this one offline, and we can follow up. I basically just have this yellow part is what is happening on the SMO side. So this is the SMO nephew cluster, management cluster, and this is the IMS side. So this is the IMS nephew implementation. And basically, I just show them how each like step is going and how you are integrating them on both sides. So I think that is the main thing I have. Then I have some details that we can follow up on. This is some thinking on how the SMO cluster template could look like. We have this workload cluster CR with the updated information. We have the repo package variant still. We have the cluster package variant referring here then to the copy O2 IMS package. Then in that copy O2 IMS package, I have that one here, yeah. Then basically we follow these injection principles that you have today then. So the workload cluster will be shown here as a configuration item. We have the spec here about that's also O2 IMS data. And then they can then be injected with the supplier replacement into the cluster copy, like the O2 IMS manifest file for copy. So that you basically then the provided plugin will use these properties then to interact on the O2IMS interface. And then this picture shows just our thinking of how the OCloud cluster template could look like. So there we still have the workload cluster CR with the properties. We see that this like VLAN indexings or other backend resource injection typically would happen on the OCloud side. It wouldn't really be visible in the SMO template. We also think that all these bootstrap CRs, they would typically only show up on the OCloud side and be managed in the OCloud template and not really be visible in the SMO template. So yeah, I think that is basically cover everything. Yeah.
So
I'll
Stefan,
rush through this now, but
Stefan,
yeah.
I did have a question, right? Because one thing that I didn't see here is we went through a lot. It's got a lot of detail. Good, right? Because I let people look at this and kind of settle in and let it germinate a little bit. We'll talk about it next week. But one of the questions I have that was not readily apparent was if I took release 2 of Nepio, do you have any architectural changes that you require of network automation to realize this vision that you have or this implementation that you're looking for?
So we are showing in the sequence diagrams that we think that we probably will need a workload cluster CR operator. I don't think we have, as far as I understand, there is no operator connected to the workload cluster CR yet. It's just there as an object that is used for injection of data or referrals and so on. So that is what we think will be needed. Yeah.
Okay. So
I have
my point
it here.
is
I have it. Yeah.
Can we document that specifically in your design and architectural consideration? What you're expecting them that you have a new operator and what it's used for, right? That way they'll know. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just giving hints to the whim.
Yeah. So we need to formally, I think you need to help me there a bit on how that formally is then documented or injected as requirements. Because now, this is the way
in your use case, you have a section in your use case that says design and architectural consideration. Just make sure that you're saying that you're adding a new what additional capabilities you're expecting from the architecture. Okay. Yeah, that one there. Yeah, put it in there, and let's it's going to look like a change, and that way Wim and Bala and the rest of the guys will say, "Oh, okay, what does this mean?" Right? I think the other,
I understand.
Yeah, and Wim, I don't know, is that generic API that you're talking about, right? For the cluster, is that part of release 2? Wim?
We are discussing it, but see, I mean, let's put it this way.
Then the answer would be no, right?
Yeah, today I would say
it's not part of release 2. If that's the question.
Level 2 and 3 is what you're asking, but here is the thing, Tim, right? I think we have to probably go into some details, right? But if you take the PV, we can reference to any upstream package, right? Whether it's OpenShift, Google, or whatsoever, right? What we do not have today is now, it's not so difficult to do. The parameters that Stefan is asking, to map them towards then the customization inside of the package. That's a few specializations you probably have to write, right? So
okay, I'm just documenting it as an architectural change that we'll have to do in release 3.
I think we have to go through the details to understand exactly how to do it, right? Or what would be the way to do it, because there's multiple ways, by the way. So
all right, so
related to your
abstraction in Stefan, I'm just making sure we get the stuff documented, right? This is my last 2 minutes, if I can. Okay. So document the architectural constraint that you want to add a new workload cluster operator and for what purpose it is. Document the constraint that we're going to need to integrate with the generic API that allows us to utilize this for, a CAPI interface versus the GCP interface versus whatever, right? And
Right.
and we need to have discussions on that further. I'm just trying to get the
Yes,
points
yes.
documented, okay? All right.
Okay, I will do that.
And those were the two that I saw that were coming out of this. I don't know if there are others, but we've got 2 more minutes, guys. So Bala, you might get the last word here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tim. Stephen, thanks for putting this whole document. Really appreciate that, and especially the sequence diagram. I'm gonna take a look at that. I wanted to ask this question that we discussed last time. Last time we talked about the exception handling. For example, SMO makes a request for provisioning a cluster to Nefio Cloud, and at which point of time, say something happens. So if everything goes through, then obviously SMO can gather it through the inventory API from O2IMS. But things go wrong. So have we considered that if things going wrong, and then Nefio management, Nefio Cloud cluster communicating back to SMO, did we consider that in that sequence diagram?
So for now, what I have is that, like, I mean, I'm following the copy approach there. That, like, once you have requested a deployment via the O2IMS interface, then a copy will, like, query for status or so then from the O2IMS side, and then update the copy custom resources then in the SMO cluster. So that would be the way we can continuously expose like the status of the deployments using the copy O2IMS resources on the SMO side.
But the thing is, on the cloud side, right? Request comes to cloud side. If something goes wrong, how does cloud communicate back to SMO?
So that, I think, is also a bit of depending on when it goes wrong. If it is a part of the deployment sequence, I would expect it is a part of this, like the status reporting then as a part of, like, what you do when you request this cluster deployment. So that is something we discuss with our representatives in Oran also, how that, like, flow will the status for the deployment as such. Then once you have successfully deployed, I mean, things can go wrong at any time later also. I mean, there we are more into the assurance part and alarm handling and so on. So we have talked about both parts, like just the one is like monitoring the actual provisioning flow, like when the cluster is requested to be deployed and how that sequence is then monitored. And that could be typically through this provider plugin then, and the copy resources on the SMO side. But then after that, then later, that would be more of a normal alarm handling then that we also need to support. So that part we have not looked into here in this proposal.
Yeah, I think it's probably we need to look at it from an abstract way from the ORAN itself. Probably it needs some discussion. Probably we can park it for the next time.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I was going to suggest, guys, because we're 2 minutes over. So what we're going to do is we're going to just keep this discussion. We're not going to send it to RX scoping. We're going to keep this discussion for next week as well, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right, guys. So that's everything for today. I will see you next week. We'll have same time, same channel. We'll continue this discussion with the Craig cluster. All right.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Talk to you later. All right. Bye, guys.
Thank you, Stephen.
Okay.
Great presentation.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.